Hey y'all, I'm Josh Tyson, co-author of Age of Invisible Machines, the first best-selling book about conversational AI. Age of Invisible Machines explores the learning of industry veteran and OneReach.ai CEO Robb Wilson. Each week, Rob and I bring in a guest to continue the conversations we started in the pages of our book. This week on the Invisible Machine podcast, we're talking about how intentionality and empathy can foster better automated experiences for employees. Why, despite their lackluster reputation for experience design, Workday might be in a good position to revitalize UX, and why human resources is an ideal starting point for an organizational journey into conversational AI. Our guest is Greg Vert, a principal and HR transformation leader at Deloitte. Greg joined us back in season 1 of the podcast to talk about the changing nature of human resources in the wake of OpenAI's release of ChatGPT. With a surge of activity and interest building around AI agents, Greg is back to talk about the experiences he's having with global enterprise clients as they seek to integrate these powerful, interconnected, shape-shifting technologies. Greg works closely with some of the largest companies in the world, and he shares insights into why the notion of AI as the UI will launch widespread systemic change across industries. Invisible Machines is produced in partnership with OneReach.ai. Their Generative Studio X platform is the only orchestration platform that's been named a leader by every major analyst group. Enterprises and other organizations are already using GSX to create technology ecosystems where they can grow their own digital teammates, called intelligent digital workers. These IDWs can be set to work with hundreds of customizable skills utilizing GSX's no-code building tools. Head to OneReach.ai to test drive an IDW and experience the next phase of generative AI. Well, Greg, great to see you again. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me back. It's been a little while.
So last time you were here on the podcast, it was a few months after ChatGPT had come out, and we spent a lot of time kind of talking about how that might change businesses' relationship with technology, especially where human resources are concerned. Now with AI agents upon us, are you seeing another shift in that relationship between business and technology, or is it still kind of business as usual?
Yeah, I think it's not business as usual. I wouldn't describe the environment as that. But I think it's a little bit of a continuation of what we talked about last time, where, immediately following the launch of ChatGPT, there was just this spike in curiosity around not just generative AI, but I think AI holistically, right? It had created the next AI hype cycle, and everyone was talking about it. One of my clients likes to say this went from a tech conversation to a boardroom conversation to a dinner table conversation in like 9 months, and now everybody's talking about it, right? But I think, after we got out of the curiosity phase and people could sort of wrap their heads around what this is and what it means for humans and technology and how we sort of approach that dynamic in the future, we started to get into the experimentation phase. And this was like mid-2024 or back into 2024. Some of our progressive clients had already been experimenting before Gen AI became this mainstream topic. But everyone else kind of jumped in at that point. And it was building POCs and ingesting a bunch of data into these secure enterprise GPTs and trying to figure out what you could do with it. And we've been in that mode for a little while now. And I think at the start of 2024, we started to see organizations say, okay, well, I'm convinced this is real. I've got my use cases. I know where I can create value with this technology. And now I just need to figure out how to deliver, how to scale, and how to get results at scale. And that's where most organizations are now. And as they start to scale, I think they're also realizing that scaled AI use in the organization is going to have a much bigger impact on the workforce. We're not just talking about, making it a little bit easier for you to find information or to get an answer to your HR policy question. We're talking about fundamentally changing the nature of work and jobs and how work gets done. And I think that's scary, right? It's like people got their head around the tech piece of it and they're like, let's go. And now they're kind of pumping the brakes a little bit, going, well, wait a minute, do we really even know how to handle this from an organization and a workforce perspective before we move too fast on the technology side? So I think that's kind of where we are. It's a continuation of the same themes, but it's like it got real, It's not theoretical anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's two things to kind of complicate that. The first is, the whole concept, point solution change versus systemic change. As you said, people were, and still are to a large degree in that point solution change. How will this change my life given that 90% of the other things in my life will remain constant, right?
Yeah.
And systemic change is where there's so much change that you can't forecast a single implication because all the other things around it will be changing. So it's sort of like self-driving cars. We think, then I can just get into my car and then just it will drive me to work and I can read a book.
Take a nap, yeah.
Right, take a nap. And it's not like, no, it can go out and actually like be an Uber for you and generate money, And,
right.
Or you may not even need to own a car anymore because the public transit system traded in all their buses for
fleet,
for self-driving vans and got rid of their bus stops because now because they have unlimited drivers and they can just come to your house and take you wherever you want to go. You're like, oh, right. So no more buses, no more public transit the way I know it, no more car ownership, just
no more BMWs, no more car insurance, no more driver's license. I mean, you can keep pulling the thread. It gets pretty radical.
Yeah. And you go, that's just there. And you go, well, how does that affect work? Well, because a car that can see and drive can also, do work in a factory. And it just, the implications to these things are massive. So then we go back to, well, let's just worry about the point solution and just take this step by step. I think the thing we've learned in the past, though, from the point solution approach is that the incremental adoption doesn't get you systemic change. All those, adding a little AI add-on to your antiquated old software isn't systemic, and it's the old software fundamentally that is going to go away. So improving it, it's like you're improving your old car with some of that innovations of a self-driving car when that old car is just obsolete.
Yeah,
and, you think you're moving forward, but you're not. You're actually wasting money.
Yeah, it's you've got a self-driving car, but you won't take your hands off the wheel, right? It's like you're not really using it to its full capability.
Right, right.
No, I think that's spot on. And so when you think about what are the more transformational investments you can make in AI that are going to lead to that systemic change, it's completely replacing the digital experience that we know today through an AI-assisted approach, right? AI is the UI, which you guys have been talking about forever, and I jumped on the bandwagon with you a while ago. But yeah, it's AI is the UI, and I think we've seen a spike in clients reaching out for that type of support. RFPs are coming out of all kinds of different industries looking for, guidance on how to start that journey, knowing that it'll be a journey. It'll be a never-ending journey, right? To take on something that big, especially when you think about large enterprise organizations that have 400, 500 different business apps that you've got to slowly sort of unravel that rat's nest to move in this direction. But that's a transformational investment.
Plus all 500 of those trying to stay relevant.
Yeah.
And kind of saying, no, we can sprinkle some AI sauce onto this and you're set. That's your strategy. We'll just do a little AI feature that summarizes your Zoom call or, gives you a quick summarization of an email, and you don't need to get rid of your email client when in reality, we don't need to know it's email.
Doesn't matter anymore. Yeah.
Just go tell, Josh that I'm going to be late to the podcast. I don't care. I don't care how you do it, and he doesn't care how he receives it, and we don't need to know that. Nobody needs to know that. And now we're at the point where that's all possible. We're just not adopting it in that fashion because of this incremental sort of locked in design paradigm that we can't get our head out of.
I do think you're right in the sense that business applications that are introducing native or embedded assistance and AI capabilities are confusing
Right.
the landscape. And I think, you know,
It's
many
like,
of our
oh,
clients are
wait,
starting.
the promise is like 1,000, we can
Right.
get rid of our 1,000 apps and have 1 or 2 or 3 ways to do stuff. Or is it we can replace all 1,000 apps with 1,000 bots?
Right. Yeah, which don't do that. If anyone's listening and thinking about that strategy, not recommended. But I do think that we've turned a corner and that some people are starting to realize that this idea of uptaking new AI functionality embedded into the 400, 500 business apps that I already have is not going to deliver that transformational systemic change, right? So that's one area. I think the other big area is how do we actually start to use AI to scale human expertise? So we have all these professionals in the workforce that are knowledgeable, experienced, and today, they're the ones that are sort of on the front line of problem solving, analyzing data, providing service and support, whatever their function may be, and there's a much better way using the AI tools that are at our disposal now to sort of embed or impart your knowledge into an AI tool that can be everywhere where you can't, right? And be available on demand and in multiple languages and all those different advantages to using AI in this way. And that's the area where I haven't seen organizations really start to move yet. I think the digital experience part of starting to move toward AI as the UI, everyone's at least starting to put money aside to invest in that. I think the strategies are still, kind of playing out, and we'll see who moves fast and what the early adopters learn and share with the rest of us. But it's movement. There's movement. There's progress since the last time we talked.
I think there's
the
a
other
huge
side
design
of it is,
challenge.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because I was thinking like, I see these things like summarize my meetings or pull action items from my meetings. I essentially take notes for me, right? And that's such a lack of empathy because for most people, myself included, the act of note-taking is the act of memorization. It's not the act of recall. It's I need to write it down so I don't forget. It's about imprinting it in my brain. I rarely go back to those pages. So when you say, oh, you can automate my note-taking for me, as if my note-taking is somehow a chore and not part of my mental process, then you've completely lost the whole point of note-taking. But we think of note-taking as some sort of chore that you defer to a secretary that's sitting in on the meeting. So you don't have to pay attention or remember anything, but that's just not how most people use it. And once you understand that, then you say, well, then let's flip it. It's not so much about taking notes for you. It's probably about reviewing your notes and telling you if you missed anything. Right.
Well, this gets back to the, how do we change as AI can take on some of these responsibilities or tasks? Like if you think of note-taking as a task, sure, like outsource it to AI. You've got that on the shelf for reference if you ever need to go back to it. But if you think of note-taking as a way to engage and memorize, the way you described it, that becomes a uniquely human capability, right? So, I think, and I'm guilty of this too. It's like now I'm dual threading everything, right? I'm taking my notes because of the things I want to remember personally and where I'm engaged in the conversation, but I'm also able to ignore parts of the conversation or parts of a workshop that are not particularly relevant for me. And if I ever need to go back and reference a transcript, it's there. It's like, how do we use both humans and machines in a way where we're taking advantage of, kind of the best of both worlds or the capabilities of both?
Right. Yeah. Even in Q&A, like, oh, great, I can have a machine answer questions so I don't have to answer these questions.
Right.
But a huge part of that, and you can speak better to this than I can, is about building relationships. It's not just about answering a question, and it's not just about a person asking a question and getting an answer. There is a whole relationship building component that is happening there that if you pull that out, then you say, well, what is the AI's objective? Is the objective so that you don't have to answer questions? Or should the objective be to build stronger relationships between employees, which might mean it doesn't answer the question, not because it doesn't know the answer, but because your relationship with that employee is critical and you've been disconnected for a while. And we start to go like, that's systemic change where we're thinking so incrementally and not just, I don't even know what you call that. It's just a false sense of reality. We don't understand that conversing with each other isn't just simply a chore, like you said.
Right.
It is, as if we're all introverts, complete introverts that don't want to have conversations with anybody. We go, no, it's a core part of being human.
Yep.
And how do you build a relationship without conversation?
Well, and it's a core part of being part of an organization, right?
Right.
Like there's an identity component wrapped up into that from a psychology perspective, right? Psychological perspective. I think I've used the word intentional more times in the last 18 months than I ever have before. It's like when you're talking about these use cases or interactions, it's all about being intentional. It's like using AI where it's the right tool for the job. Because if the interaction is truly transactional in nature and AI is equipped to provide a good experience or good support, then use it and use it to its full extent, right?
Yeah.
And I think about, HR policy inquiries or like understanding how a process works, right? It's institutional knowledge. You can embed it in AI, and AI can provide faster, better answers than having to chase down an HR professional or your manager, right? Whose bandwidth for that is going to be limited, it's constrained, versus, something that gets more into, I think, what you're talking about, which is how do we collaborate to create value in an organization? And
Right.
That's where, I wouldn't want to send an AI proxy of myself to participate in this podcast,
Right.
Like, well, what the three of us as humans are going to uncover here and talk about today is be so much more interesting than if we had our AI assistants proxy for us,
Yeah.
That would be boring. I probably wouldn't watch. And then there's also this concept of like the moment that matters, right? Where being human and interacting human to human remains incredibly important. And I think about, safety issues or workplace issues, talent relations kind of matters where, you're making hiring decisions or exit decisions. And, we need to show up with that empathy that AI can't really replicate in a meaningful way. You can train on tone, you can train on different sort of like superficial things, but you can't really replicate empathy. So I think it's all about intentionality. And it's like, what's the interaction you're trying to improve the experience around, and being intentional of whether AI is the right tool based on what it can do and do well.
Yeah.
And what your strategy is, I guess, around that moment. Is it core to your business, or is it just something that has to get done?
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk about anthropomorphism in a second, but before we jump there in a sort of bridge over to that, I was just thinking, about this idea that if we're going to have an AI, like you said, stand in for us in some fashion, whether I'm a call center agent or whether I'm the CEO, it's this AI stand-in. And somehow we don't really think about like maybe a college intern from community college as like probably less than that is the level of where this AI is at the moment, in most respects. And so you're starting to say like, yeah, I've got a college intern that I'm going to have stand in for me as I answer questions to some of my most important customers.
Yeah.
So I don't have to answer those questions. And we saw that in a project we worked on recently for SMBs, where we did some user research, and at first the SMBs were like, oh my God, yeah, an AI to answer all those questions because they're busy,
Get it off my plate. Yeah.
Get it off my plate. But before we sort of just, closed the door and said, okay, so they want something to answer these questions. We started having them go through their past conversations over text message and just like take a look at which ones they would want to have automated, and they realized even the ones that it could automate, like what are the directions to your office? There were things like, yeah, but that triggered something. Oh shoot.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. They're coming to my office.
for the first time, and
I got to remember. Yeah, I got to remember to do blah 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 blah. So them being out of the loop on that whole thing wasn't useful.
Right.
It didn't improve the experience, and these were their important customers. And so, at first glance, the idea of not having to do this stuff sounded great to them. But I think in reality, what they really wanted was one to ensure that they didn't ghost their customers. If they messaged them and didn't get back to them within a certain amount of time, that at least they got some response, something that would chase them down to make sure they answered, something that would help them be proactive, something that might loop somebody else in if they were the wrong person anyway. So it became more of a routing, a smart router, a sort of reasoning router than to be able to answer questions. And all of a sudden,
that concierge role,
yeah, the value prop changed entirely to something that looked a lot more like a smart answering machine than a surrogate for yourself.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's kind of going back to the whole note-taking example. It's like the right answer is probably me as a human and my AI assistant engaging in the conversation together.
Right.
And using AI to record the full transcript that I may or may not ever need to go back to, but using my own mind to engage in the areas where I need to remember or it's meaningful for me to participate and contribute. And it's probably hard on the surface to know, going into a conversation, whether it's with a customer or with an employee, it's probably hard to know how that balance is going to shake out between the two. It's like, what information am I going to get that's just there for posterity versus the information that I need to absorb as a human? And so, this idea of going at it together and kind of working humans and AI, in concert is what's fascinating to me, right? Because then we get the value out of the technology, but we also remain human first and foremost, and we don't miss out on those pieces of information that we would otherwise lose out on if we were fully outsourcing the conversation to a machine, right?
Right. And a lot of these implementations, they're spending a lot of money, they're taking a lot of time, and then they implement something that's designed poorly. In other words, that doesn't take into account reality. And that kind of leads to the other area of conversation, which is Gen AI, AI in general. For those in the space, I heard it well put by an MIT professor we had on the podcast, which is those of us in the space are doomed to work on something that almost works. Because the second it works reliably, it's no longer AI anymore. It's just technology. And so AI is kind of this definition of when machines do things that typically we're used to humans doing, until typically machines do it, which that only happens when it becomes flawless and works well.
Yeah.
So if you're in AI, you're going to move on to the next thing that almost works.
That almost works, yeah. Chasing the unicorn, yeah.
Right. But now I believe that paradigm has changed in the sense that software development has moved from something that will ever completely work to more like pharmaceuticals or drugs, where it never always works. We're always looking at an efficacy rate. Some of them will be really poor, but the stakes being so high that when they do work, it's worth it. And so we're actually moving from a scenario where you build something, test it, determine that it will absolutely work, to something around drug trials and saying, okay, we're gonna put something out there. We're gonna make sure it doesn't do any damage. First of all, like that's the most important thing. Okay, it didn't do any damage. That's a huge win, right? And now we go an efficacy rate without damage of even 15% or 10% might be worth it.
Like what's your threshold?
Right. Yeah. It's just a whole different way of thinking about software and the software process. Even with things as simple as, does it answer the question accurately? Well, it's always going to be what percent of the time does it. It's never going to be 100% of the time. it's accurate. And I think companies are really struggling with this because they're used to, at least, even though, as we know, software doesn't work 100% of the time,
Right.
they're used to the illusion that it does, right?
Right.
And
right.
then when it doesn't, at least they have a person to blame, and that makes them feel happy because they can just, attribute it to incompetence and then assume that next time will be better, right? But now when the machine makes the mistake and there's no person to blame, and you just know that mistakes are just going to happen, the question is, I guess right now it's pull back, right? It's don't go forward for a lot of folks because it's not perfect.
Yeah.
I don't know. What are your thoughts on all that?
You triggered a couple different things for me. And the first one is you said there were two big themes in that I talk to clients about all the time. The first one is this idea that artificial intelligence has basically become this big, vague umbrella term where, it's any type of machine that can replicate any type of human intelligence or human capability. And so that creates this like massive universe of possibilities because there's so many different types of machines out there and there's so many different types of human intelligence or human capability. So we're kind of talking about everything, right, at this point. So don't get lost in that. Instead, kind of focus in on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to automate something? You're trying to create an experience? Are you trying to analyze data that you just can't do manually? Like those are the more practical groundings for a conversation on what AI can do than talking about machine learning
and also
and
in that drug trial. Like how many drugs ended up becoming like something that sprouts hair instead of cures cancer? Right.
And it's still became a massive revenue channel, right?
So you got to be open to like, you're going to start on one vector, but pay attention. It may turn into another one and you got to ride that.
Yeah. That's the Bob Ross happy accident, right? It's a happy accident.
We've been unpacking like AI agents a lot recently. And this, I feel like this relates to one of the things we've sort of uncovered that like one thing they really represent is a shift in our relationship with software. From software being something you give instructions to, you give it instructions to do a very precise task, to now you're giving it objectives.
Yep.
So you're not like limiting, what it can do in a way. It opens it up to this whole broader universe of use cases.
Yeah, you give it an objective and then you have an efficacy of it completing that objective. And then you have constraints. Like these are the tools you have, don't go outside of them.
Right. So this is the second big theme, right? It's this idea that we're on a journey now with AI. There's not going to be a finish line, to your point, right? We're never going to get to a place where we go, this works perfectly, we're done. And I think we have to start to think about managing this technology the same way we think about managing people. So you used efficacy score. I think about it more from like a performance management perspective. So the same variability and wild card element exists when humans are performing, right? Yeah. We have no way to control and put guardrails up in a way where it's definitive what outputs they will produce. And I think now that's the world we're moving into with AI.
Yeah. It's also interesting too to think of it that way because all of our jobs were designed for humans. It's the whole anthropomorphic, idea. With robots, we see it at anatomically correct robots. Like, why are we doing this? Well, because most jobs have been designed for the human body.
Right. Ergonomically designed for
But then you really get the power when you redesign the job, right? Like that's systemic change. Redesign the job then, because in the digital world, that's much easier than in the factory. And Josh, actually, we were talking about this, and he made a great example, which is those automated car washes, right?
Yeah.
And just like, what's better, the way they are now, or a bunch of robots running around, like, polishing your car? It takes like a half an hour now because they've got to like run to all the parts of the car.
Replicating the way humans would wash a car, right?
Right, exactly.
Thinking about it completely differently.
Yes.
Yeah, what's the most efficient design? Yeah, that's an interesting idea too, and I think this whole concept of work redesign is part of what I mentioned earlier. Like we're now in this phase of trying to scale and create more of those transformational or systemic changes, and I think one of the big barriers for organizations is they're looking at this, they're looking at the impact on work and kind of following that to the impact on the workforce, their organization structure and design, their operating model, and they're going like, we don't even know where to begin. Like, we're talking about such a massive change that's linking technology progress with, human capital redesign in a way that we've not really had to deal with before. Primarily impacting, to your point, digital or knowledge workers.
Yeah.
I think there will be some impact for frontline, workers that have to be in a physical environment. We think about nurses and doctors as examples of that, but there will be an impact. There will be physical robotics that will come into play in some of the work that they do, but nowhere near as fast of an impact and as severe of an impact as we'll see with digital workers. Myself and probably all of us included, right? Like the way that my job, as I think about it and define it today, should look radically different, very different a few years from now. And there's this like dependency on when are the tools and the technology going to get to a place where it makes sense for me to go, oh, my job should change.
Right.
There's not going to be that clear moment, right? And we're going to get velocitized to
It'll be a meeting in the middle.
Tools.
Your job will change towards what to an environment a robot can be more successful in.
Yep.
And then the robot will become more capable as, it has more data from doing your job and learning across different organizations and et cetera. So it's like this meeting. It'll come to you and you will come to it and that whole thing. This kind of brings me to an area I want to discuss, particularly as it pertains to employee interaction, because I think it's more pertinent in that example. But it comes back to the anthropomorphism kind of concept, the anatomically correct robot. We all like, wow, that's amazing. Oh, look, it can jump up and down, and then you're going, yeah, but what?
Yeah, all the Boston Dynamic stuff.
Yeah. You're like,
but fun to watch. Yeah.
Yeah, look, you can walk it like a dog. You're like, yeah, but I don't want. That's
right.
No, I wouldn't.
But I think people watch those videos and get comfort from it. They watch these big bulky robots trying to mimic the way we walk, and they're like, oh, this is years away. I'm good for now. It can't.
The backwards knees are a little weird.
Yeah, backwards knees. The whole thing. It's just sort of like, all right, this isn't. We're years away. But in the digital world, it's now, right? It's happening now.
Yeah, that backward knee is perfect example. Like, why should the knee just bend one way? Like, only because ours did. That's why they did it. And they're like, well, it could go backwards. And everyone's like, whoa, did you see
Mind
that?
blowing. Yeah.
You're like, what? I'm pretty sure that's been around for a long time. The ability to, to create a hinge and put it on a door.
It's a complex machine.
Yeah, I don't know who invented the hinge, but I'm sure it was a long time ago.
It's the Earl of Hinge, I think.
Yeah. And they probably right from the beginning thought this could probably have been more than a knee. The idea is swapping that over to the digital world. I feel like we're very much so limiting ourselves by, and OpenAI just did their release, talking to it, and it's gesturing and laughing, and it's super anthropomorphic, from my opinion, creepy.
Yeah, uncanny valley kind of stuff.
Yeah, just wait a second. And let's just forget the fact that it's uncanny valley for a moment, and it just throws me off because it's not a real person, and it keeps that deception just bothers me. But the taking it to the side of like, by making it human, we're limiting its capability now, because let's say, for example, it could give us 3 possible answers to a question. Now it gives us 1 because humans give you 1. They're single-threaded. So you ask a question, you get an answer, and then we think of the interface as giving us a single answer when there might be 3 great answers to a question. One that's, let's say it's a health question. Should I eat this donut? Well, we'll give you the pros, we'll give you the cons, and we'll give you what Dr. Oz would say, or whatever, right? Give me all 3 answers, but we're not thinking that way because we're so anthropomorphized in the experience we're creating that we want it to give us the answer, right? Or maybe the answer should be an interface, a slider. Maybe the answer should be, a tool, a software tool, a small micro UI, not words. And so I just wonder if there's like actual huge practical downside to this anthropomorphic side, And then I was thinking with employees, I think there's a tendency to almost go towards anthropomorphism, like, oh yeah, we want our HR bot to be like really
Have a
friendly
personality.
and have a
Yeah.
personality. And then I thought, like, wait, you're in HR. Maybe like that deception is like the opposite of what you should want. Maybe it should be, because you're in HR, you should be like, no, it should
Yeah.
not have a personality. We should be transparent and honest with people.
Right.
We should not be manipulating them into thinking that this is an actual human, and not give this false sense of empathy.
Right.
I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
No, I mean, once again, a couple different nuances and themes in there that are worth unpacking. I think the whole anthropomorphism thing in HR, and whether you give your chatbot or digital assistant a personality, I think some of that is just to help us through the change curve.
Right.
It's like we're
Right.
shifting things that humans used to do to
Schemorphism, yeah.
machines.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're saying, well, you know what, in order to ease that transition for the workforce, let's make this seem as human-like as we possibly can. When, if you cut to the end, right, like if you're an employee and you need an answer to a question and you can get a reliable, fast answer from AI, and it's a better experience than having to go find a human, you don't care whether it has a personality or not, right? Like that's not why you're going to seek that experience, right? You're going to seek it because it gets you the information you need and allows you to move on with your day. And that's, most HR interactions are probably in that category. There's some that are much more complicated, and those are where I think humans will continue to play the lead role, maybe with some AI support to give you some better data and things to make decisions. But, when you're dealing with an injury in the workplace, or someone even going out on a leave of absence because they're battling cancer or having their first child, like those are situations where I think we want to keep some humanity and empathy in the interaction itself. And yeah, you could use AI, but again, it really, following the human-centered design approach, it's like, what does the employee need?
Yeah.
In that moment, is it a fast answer from a machine and you don't care what personality it has, or is
Right.
it a high-touch supported experience where somebody's going to actually care, demonstrate care about you as a part of their organization?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
figuring out the right balance there is important.
Yeah, it's like, I reported an emergency or an injury? Do I
Yep.
want it to be empathetic and be like, oh, are you okay? Or do I want it to say, I've let your manager know, I've let others know that care, they've been alerted, like humans are now aware of what happened, so that you're like, great.
We're getting the
that's-
humans involved. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Wait, that's caring, right? That's like
Right.
real caring. The other one is fake caring.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm with you on the transparency thing, and I think we will get there collectively. But right now we're using that as sort of like a change management transition thing. And it's one of those ones where we'll look back on it later and be like, oh, that was a really bad idea, but we needed the hindsight to sort of realize it,
Yeah.
I
Drop
was surprised
shadows on our
watching like
buttons.
I think it was like the GPT-4o intro. He was almost like flirting with his agent, and it was sort of looking around the room, and he was leading it around and saying, oh, you are the announcement. How exciting is that? And it's possible they were kind of trying to replicate the vibe of the movie Her, which we like quite a bit to demonstrate some of the things. But it does feel like there is a compulsion to really lean into this anthropomorphism. And maybe people do need that skeuomorph, but maybe they also
take a
could
step
use
stone.
less of it.
Yeah.
It might be appropriate in some situations, though, right? And definitely not in the HR space. So, but like more in the entertainment space, and we'll start to see, AI playing, different products out there that we can interact with for entertainment purposes, or different things. And I do think that's a good use of the anthrop, right?
Totally.
The other thing you brought up that I think is really interesting is this idea of like, if we start to use AI to get answers to questions or information in general, and we go from, we start to narrow the perspectives we get, because instead of, asking a person and having a dynamic conversation where you can talk about different perspectives, you're just getting one answer over and over again. And I think that goes back to the use case as well, where it's like in the HR space, there are lots of questions where we strategically only want one answer. right? You are asking a policy question. You're asking a question that touches up against legal, regulatory, considerations. We want one answer. That actually is a benefit to the workforce, and it's a benefit to the enterprise to have that level of consistency. But there are other areas where things are open to interpretation. I think about like coaching a manager to deal with a talent situation or a performance situation. It's like you want to contextualize that to the individual,
Right.
Their work style, the manager's work style, and their level of comfort having certain conversations. There's a business chemistry element to it, right? Like what's going to be most effective in that moment. The interesting thing is I don't think humans are that good at coaching other humans in that situation. But I think we could actually train AI, to your point, to provide those different perspectives. So it's in situations where it's not, there's one right definitive answer every time, but we actually want to give you different things to think about so that you can learn to be more effective as a manager and share different, like broader perspectives than you would get if you just went to one HR business partner and said, tell me how to deal with this performance problem. I think there's actually power in that. And it's not something that I've hear a lot of organizations talking about. They talk about this idea of a coaching assistant, but it's still more of that like one response, kind of prescribed response to different prompts. And I think there's an opportunity to kind of share more diverse perspectives through AI.
Yeah, more proactive for sure. That's super interesting. As we think about coaching, again, you have to like understand what is good coaching, not like what is bad coaching, and let's automate bad coaching. Right. You're like, look, now I don't have to do the bad coaching anymore. Now the bad coaching that we used to do to 10 people, we can do to 100 people every week. Yeah. This is awesome. Yeah. Right.
Well, we talk about that in like the goal setting and performance review space, because it's all text, and you can use ChatGPT or Gemini or any of these other tools that are out there to help you write goals and help you write performance reviews for employees. And now that you have a secure enterprise GPT, which most of our clients do, you can go do it there, and you can actually input, company specific details about, your sales plan or forecast for the quarter or whatever. And so it can get really good in terms of output. But that's another area where it's like, you probably want different perspectives. You don't want to just like get a single output and just go with it. Yeah. And I think there's a risk, and some clients have shared this concern with me. There's a risk that managers will start to shirk their responsibilities as people managers, as people leaders, and just sort of take all this like stuff that you could cynically view as administration off their plates and outsource it to AI. And AI is now writing goals and evaluating performance for, not really evaluating, but documenting the performance for your workforce. And I think that, there's a potential that could actually impact overall organizational performance, right? If you take the human out of the loop in some of those activities.
Yeah. I thought of you actually recently, Greg. I was reading a Business Insider article. I think it's called "Everybody Hates Workday" by Matt Alston, who I think we're actually speaking with next week on the podcast. Cool. But he points out that, more than half of Fortune 500 companies are using this kind of reviled software for like payroll, hiring, onboarding, benefits. I think somewhere in there, the PTO process is described as Kafkaesque. There's plenty of expletive-laden Reddit posts that are referenced. Yeah. What does that say about where we are with systemic change? Like, is something like Workday being entrenched in all these huge companies slowing systemic change, or is it going to be just disrupted and we won't see it coming, and then all of a sudden it'll just be irrelevant?
And the interesting thing about that article, just to add on to that question, was that he talked a lot about like companies, don't really care about making it easy for employees to add expenses. It's just, they don't want it to be on purpose. It's like
intentionality, right?
Yeah. And so
there it is.
And so they're like, and maybe it's on purpose. It's probably not. It's just a lack of priority.
Right.
It's not what they value. Like, a little friction is good in the process.
Right.
And you go, okay, so it's not where they're at is making this easier. But then again, like, do you build this into AI? Anyway, I just wanted to add that tidbit onto.
No, so it's interesting. I've been working in and around the Workday ecosystem for over 10 years.
Okay.
And you go back to 2013 when cloud-based applications were the biggest trend in technology. It was all about moving away from on-prem to cloud-based apps. Workday emerged as a leader in that market because of the user experience. So at the time when they were gaining all this market share, because they can went from nothing to the market leader in a 5, 6, 7 year period. It was a macro large enterprise trend. It forced their competitors to rapidly build cloud-based products to compete or to protect the market share that they had in the
funny you
previous
say that
on-prem
because
chapter.
It's funny you say that because I actually I had a firm back then that was a design firm, software design firm, and we actually worked on Workday back in those days.
Yeah,
And,
I know they took a pride in it.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't.
No, it was a huge priority for them. And if you go back to the founders, they came from a different previous generation HR technology that was known for its kind of user experience.
Right.
And they sold it and they started Workday, and it was founded on this principle of like delivering a really great user experience. And this is around the time that we were really pushing, every large enterprise on the planet was pushing more and more to self-service, right? It goes back to that efficiency or growth, whatever, thing you're working toward. Self-service helps you get there, right? Because now you don't need to hire an HR team to manage people's addresses and worker data. You can have the worker do it themselves or their manager do it themselves, but you have to give them tools to do it, to make it easy. So you go back just 5 or 6 years ago, Workday was a market leader in terms of market share. I'm not saying they're the best product or anything like that, right? But in terms of market share, they were the market leader.
Right.
They are the market leader.
Yeah.
And they got there off of a differentiated user experience. There were other things too, but it was primarily a differentiated users. So if from my point of view as a kind of a historian in the space, is what's really changed is people's expectations from what a good digital experience really means and what it can be. And you look at how quickly ChatGPT was adopted, and we've heard all the stories about it being like the fastest internet app to reach 100 million users or whatever. People are tuned into the idea that that's the type of technology experience you could have.
Right.
This idea that I don't need to be trained or learn how to use a particular software program. I can just show up with my natural language that I've spent my whole life learning.
Right.
It's different from everybody else's, but I can put in my commands, I can put in my ask, and now the burden is on technology to do that, carry that out for me, to carry out that task for me. You said concierge earlier.
Right.
And I think because of that, the expectations from a consumer perspective and from a workforce perspective are super high. And because of how big some of these, enterprise apps and HR apps have gotten, and because of the cloud infrastructure, right? They've got thousands of customers on there. It's hard to change. It's become almost monolithic, right?
Yeah.
So you're now trying to catch up with this very fast-moving space, and being able to deliver a completely different type of user experience that
it's like an
natural
outdated
language.
kitchen. It was good.
Yeah.
It was good when it was made. It's still functional, but kitchens have come so far. They have microwaves now. Yep.
Smart kitchens. Yeah. And so what do I mean, I'm not going to make a big, bold prediction here, but, I think Workday is well positioned to adapt because of the amount of data and the amount of customers that they have.
Right.
But I'm sure they're feeling the pressure to move very quickly to do so. Not necessarily of the fear of becoming obsolete, but minimizing their role, the application portfolio, their role in the landscape, and kind of becoming further and further behind the scenes. Because at the end of the day, most organizations are not going to want to have to rebuild. Going back to your comments around software, right? They're not going to have to rebuild the business process engine to enable hiring and pay. And there's legal needs to do that consistently.
Right.
And so I still see a role for this, but it's whether that continues to be the experience layer and whether they can kind of catch up with modern expectations in time to sort of keep that footing, or if it opens up the door for other approaches.
Right. It's to your point, they have the fuel to be the breakout player, but if somebody breaks out, then all bets are off, right? Which
is how they emerged. That's how they
Right.
emerged.
Right. So someone can do to them what they did to others if they're not careful. I think that's true for most of these industries is, as long as all the, all of them sort of line up at the cliff's edge, but none of them jump and start flying,
Yeah.
it's going to be fine. But then when that 1, 2, it's going to be very hard for the others to catch up because there is a force multiplier effect at play for a lot of this.
The other thing, there are 2 other trends that are sort of opening up a new door for organizations. One is there's better interoperability between business applications than there's ever been before. APIs, REST APIs, the connectivity is there to be able to start to create more integrated experiences. It's not perfect, but organizations are less intimidated by building integrations than they were 3-4 years ago. 3-4 years ago, you would have viewed that as technology debt, and you would have said, I need to get everything into a much smaller set of applications to reduce that technology debt, right? And simplify my landscape, minimize my landscape. So the interoperability between apps is a big deal. And the second piece is it's much easier now to build something than it's ever been before. So you don't have to be, a big tech company to build your own digital experience layer on top of some of these applications.
Right.
That's low code, no code type solutions. It's a lot more business user training of AI than it is, hardcore development. There's Gen AI that helps you write code.
Yeah.
Everything is sort of moving down the path of I can create something custom if I want to. Whereas even again, 2 or 3 years ago, a lot of HR organizations in particular, being primarily a cost center, would look at that and go, we're not going to go down that path. We want to buy something, we want to maintain it, we want to keep things simple, focus on supporting the workforce. Keep the technology simple, focus on supporting the workforce. But I think digital experience is becoming digital experience and workforce productivity are becoming such top level C-suite agenda items that more and more organizations are going to go down the path of building something if they can't find something in the market that gets them what they need. And if you deliver a really productive experience, you're going to have an easier time attracting, hiring, and retaining talent that has no patience for that, which I would put developers and engineers into that category. I'd put creatives into that category. They don't want to spend time doing this stuff. And so if you can give them that time back to do what they're passionate about or what they what they love to do, then you're going to see you're going to see benefits on the talent front.
There's an interesting point in there that is, if you don't redo your front end, someone else will, because it's abstracted now, it's available, and it could be your competitor, it could be another piece of software that doesn't. It could be your customer. It could be another piece of software that used to not compete with you, that now has decided, well, I own the front end. Once I own the front end, I own the customer. This all underlies this point that a lot of these companies break through on the front end experience. Just time and time again, we see Facebook, just examples where it's a UX innovation, but then they just lose their way from a design. It's like the design component that got them there somehow fades in the organization. Do you have an explanation for that? Like what? I don't know. Like what? Is it just that different people take over that have bad taste, or what's happening?
I don't have a great or clear explanation. I can give you some speculation though. So one thing is, I think as you get a much bigger user base, it's hard to get a clear signal in terms of feedback.
Right.
And so you'll get a lot of noise.
The parachutes everyone likes, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like how do you cut through the noise to get to the real, user sentiment that is going to help you continue to maintain that differentiated experience. I think it is probably bad management behavior, bad business behavior to constantly want to improve. And sometimes the best designs are the ones that are left simple.
Right.
It may have been better the way you started than to keep adding in all these bells and whistles and features. We think of progress as addition, when sometimes from a design perspective, it's really more about subtraction.
Right.
And I think, whenever you have a big breakthrough like a Workday or a Facebook, it inspires copycats or
Right.
not copycats. I'm
No,
trying to think of the right
improving
word,
it,
but
right? It
yeah.
creates a new baseline. I could make a better iPhone while looking
Yeah.
at an iPhone than before I ever saw one, right? Yeah.
So you just end up creating or maybe intensifying your own competitive landscape when you reach that level of popularity. Like you
Yeah.
create the next generation that's going to take you down through inspiration.
Yeah, I was thinking about two things in this respect. One is just new people with bad taste, or new people that aren't close to the product anymore. They're so close to the business,
Some management
not the product,
layers, yeah.
so they don't have to use it. So they're not reminded that it's outdated, and but also just simply that's not their thing. It's just so rare companies like Apple that are able to sustain and keep design it just seems like inevitable that design will fall away. And then you look at Apple, who just continues to keep it at the forefront, which is super rare, but it's their superpower.
Yeah.
And
awareness
good design
thing.
is expensive
Yeah.
too, right? I mean, it's resource heavy.
Yeah, maybe that's it. It's the kind of thing you can't invest in and know. It's kind of comes back to this idea of generative AI. You're going to have to run trials, and you're going to have to be okay with failures, and you're not going to be able to fund something with certainty that it's going to be successful or that it's going to solve the problem that you set out to solve. It might solve a different one that's even more valuable than the problem you set out for, and that uncertainty is probably a huge part of it. Design being just an example of, you have to invest in good design, but you don't know that you'll get a good design.
No, that's true. And the other thing that kind of jumps to mind is I spend a lot of my time in the market talking to the people that are responsible for HR and workplace technology. And, we'll often kind of start the conversation with, well, how are you doing? How are you performing? And they will pull up a scorecard, and it usually will feature the amount of enhancements that they delivered or defects that got resolved. And I'll go, well, what about like the net promoter score for your HR tools or for your onboarding experience? And they just don't. That's the ultimate outcome if you're responsible for improving the experience, is to actually have your customers say this was good, it was positive, and they just don't even have a good feedback loop. And so they're just delivering and delivering and delivering, and they don't know whether they're really moving the needle on.
That is the point, isn't it? Feedback.
Yeah.
Isn't that the point? And that is the game changer on AI, because AI can collect feedback at a granular level and manage it and synthesize it. So it's probably like almost the number one value of moving your UI from a graphical UIs have absolutely horrible feedback loops inherently. We don't know what you clicked on. We don't know why you clicked on it. We don't know if what you clicked on is what you thought you clicked on, unless we ask a survey afterwards.
Right.
Eye tracking,
everybody hates.
It's hilarious. We don't know. We can't learn much from eye tracking.
No.
We don't know if you liked the interface, but when you go to conversational, you get all the details. You know exactly what's happening. It's a built-in feedback loop. We know what you came there for. We know what you wanted to do. We know whether we accomplished it at a granular level. We can measure that. So I guess we're so used to not being able to measure. Now we'll go into this world of conversation not measuring because we forgot that matters. But maybe that changes everything. Maybe it's just about quantifying the user experience so that it can be in a PowerPoint presentation. And off we go.
Well, and I think it's also helpful to know whether you're heading in the right direction and doing the right things, prioritizing the right things to see, trends, right? But it is very limited for all the reasons you said. And I hope as we move more and more toward conversational AI as the primary experience layer, that we'll be able to use that richer data set to drive even better experiences over time. And we'll start to see kind of the hockey stick effect, right? Whereas today we're limited by the lack of data that we have at our disposal. And this kind of reminded me of another conversation I've been having a lot with clients recently. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of, workforce impacts of AI and generative AI. And it's this idea that most organizations have no productivity baseline to start assessing the impacts of what AI will would have or could have on the workforce. So you can introduce a new tool like a Turbo Code or GitHub Copilot, and you can test it in certain use cases and say, oh, well, this should help these type of junior developers complete this type of task 10% faster. And if you've got 100 people doing that work, you're like, okay, well, now I only need 90. Like, it's very simple algebra. But the reality is, like, you're not factoring for productivity in there at all, and that some people work faster than others. And we just don't have a good baseline for that. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges that we'll see with organizations making workforce adjustments as AI rolls out, is they just don't know where to begin and like what to compare it to. It's like all we can see is the post. We don't have the
and like
pre.
you said, it's going to be a complicated answer. These 20%, it improved productivity. This 20%, it actually made it worse.
Right.
This middle is indifferent. Net, it didn't move anything forward at all. But now that we know the 20 that it did improve, if you just cut out the rest, it actually has a net positive. But without being able to slice that, you're just going to throw the whole thing away and say it didn't work.
Yeah, everyone's flying blind. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just a new way of thinking, a new way of deploying, and this one size fits all is probably the hardest thing for us to get our heads out of.
Yeah.
Is that
concept. And the reason I bring it up is because I think, the topic of employee experience, digital experience for the workforce has been around for years, and it continues to stay toward the top of the list for a lot of our clients because they haven't really unlocked it. They haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah.
Right. There's still so much room for improvement. But when you start to dig into, well, why are you interested in improving the digital experience? The conversation's really about productivity.
Right.
We want to make the experience better so the workforce is more productive and therefore more efficient.
Yeah, that was a funny moment. I've had this moment a few times where folks are like, okay, we're going to go to Copilot Pro or whatever. We're going to buy Copilot for all of our employees. What kind of productivity boost should we expect? And I'm like, 0. And they're like, what do you mean 0? I was like, 0. They're already using ChatGPT. If it could help them, it's already happened. If you haven't noticed it already, which it sounds like you haven't, you haven't gotten rid of anybody. Don't expect that your bill will get higher, but
consumption will increase.
But you're not going to see anything because we're humans. And if we can conserve calories and we can find a way to get our work done faster, we've already done it. Your employees have already done it.
The only challenge I would say to that is I do think that there are slices of the workforce out there that haven't really dipped their toe in they haven't figured it out. They haven't gone out there. And maybe they're using it for some very basic things, but that well is deeper than I think most people realize in terms of how it can help them.
If you deploy something not generic, as like not just another version of ChatGPT, but you actually go into deploying something specifically designed, an experience specifically designed for a group of people to get their work done, you'll see massive improvements.
Exactly.
It's this whole general UI for everyone, that looks just like ChatGPT. You're going to go, there's no point. You're better off selecting a small group of individuals, just like we talked to with the knowledge management guy from NASA, right? You select a small group of individuals that you think you can have the biggest impact on. You get them. You find out what knowledge is critical to them getting their job. Not all the knowledge in the organization. What is the critical knowledge for that group, for them to become more productive? You focus on the skills that will make them more productive. Then you work on that. To your point, you get that feedback loop going, and then you just take that approach chunk by chunk, trying to think smaller, I guess, right? Is that?
Yeah. You got to start small. That's what we always say. Think big, start small, scale quickly.
Yeah.
But I think that's exactly it. And I talk to clients about the generic productivity tools, the Copilots and the enterprise GPTs, and I'm like, don't get me wrong, there's value in that.
Right.
It will be commoditized. Everyone's going to have one.
Right.
But it will make people's lives easier to find information, to get answers to questions. But if you're thinking that alone is going to drive significant productivity savings, you're wrong. And if even if it were, your problem is probably more of an adoption problem.
Yeah.
It's getting people to use it and use it effectively, consistently, and everybody, right?
It's like ketchup, right? Ketchup can make a lot of meals better for a lot of people.
Not a fan, but
yeah,
I hear you.
good. But it's not going to make you a chef. Ketchup on any meal isn't going to make you a chef. But yes, it's useful. Yes, yeah. I mean, dry French fries, throw some ketchup on there. Like it's obviously a makes sense for big companies like Microsoft. They have to think big. They want to move the needle in big ways, and so they need to sell ketchup.
Going back to the point earlier, like we don't have a really good baseline to start from, and most large enterprises are not equipped to deal with this type of change.
Right.
We've thought of change historically around big milestones and go live dates, and on this day you're going to have this role and use this tool. Starting tomorrow, you're going to have this role and use this tool. And change is concentrated in this moment where it's easier to manage around. What we're talking about with generative AI is this constantly moving target for the next several years, because we're going to be rolling out new tools.
Right.
Those tools are going to have more and more use cases because they're going to have more and more data. The quality of the outputs are going to get better and better through that feedback loop. And so the impact that generative AI has on any given role, or maybe down to the individual level in the workforce, is variable, and it changes. And I think we're not really well equipped to deal with that type of constant change. And it goes back to what we said earlier with my, talking about my job. It's like, I don't know when there's going to be that moment of clarity where it's like, okay, things are different. I need to redesign my job as a result. I think it's going to be a lot of really incremental changes. It doesn't mean that'll happen
slowly. You'll just
slowly.
wake up to a new job and be like,
we talk about getting velocitized. We're going to get velocitized to the change that generative AI is going to bring on. And HR has an opportunity at the enterprise level to sort of be the ones that pays attention to that.
Yeah.
Both at a micro level and at the macro level.
I agree with that.
Here's the moment where we need to intervene and redesign our finance function, or redesign how our engineers are structured. And I think if HR doesn't do that, it's going to be, if they don't step up and kind of play that role and take advantage of the opportunity, they're going to leave each of their peers and business to figure it out on their own, and it's going to be messy. And we're already starting to see some organizations that don't really know what to do are just saying, well, we're going to stop hiring for this role because we think Gen AI will be able to offset the need for people. And there's no real path to sort of get there. So I think HR has a huge opportunity there. And the other part of that is this idea of how do we think about and manage talent? So human talent, right? Who do we need to hire? How do we move toward more of a skills-based or more dynamic way of thinking about roles and talent in the organization? How do we think about performance? I think performance management is going to be recalibrated thanks to AI. It won't be about your contributions as an individual. It'll be about how well you work with AI to create contributions as in a kind of a teaming approach, and working with other people. I think compensation could get really interesting as you start to think about this idea. We talk about using AI to scale expertise. If I've spent 20 years of my career building up an expertise, what's my incentive to embed that into a corporate asset?
Yeah.
That I no longer can make income off of, right?
Right.
That's my worth, right?
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of really interesting things out there. I think one last one that's really important is DEI rose to the top of the agenda. Diversity, equity, and inclusion rose to the top of the agenda as we were talking about, Black Lives Matter and a lot of stuff that happened around the time of COVID. That started to fall down the list, I think, in the shadow of Gen AI. But there's a real chance that Gen AI could negatively impact groups in the workforce that are already marginalized or underrepresented. And if organizations want to stay true to some of the DEI promises that they've made, they have to really tune into that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you may end up working backwards or sliding backwards. So there's all kinds of talent implications of all this.
Sure.
And HR has to step up to lead that because no one else really can. No one else is positioned to do that.
I'll kind of finish on this note. I think the challenge is, you're building a new bridge, right? You're not improving the same bridge you have. And a lot of people think they're just making improvements to the bridge they have. You're like, no, that bridge isn't going to get you across the river you're going to have to build a new bridge. And for a while, you've got to pay for the upkeep of the old bridge.
Yep.
And you got to pay for the building of the new bridge. And you got to go to your shareholders and say, hey, you know what? Like, just like Palantir and some of these guys are doing, like, we're not going to have the profits we used to. We're not going to be able to do the stock buybacks. We're going to take that money and we're going to build a new bridge. And until that bridge starts moving traffic, you're not going to see the fruits of it.
Yeah.
And I think there are those companies, brave is probably the wrong word. They have the luxury and potentially the capital to be able to build another bridge. And then there's those that are living on the edge. They can't afford to build that other bridge and keep the current one going. So they're just hoping that just, dressing up the old bridge, using the same engineers, trying to add Gen AI features to their current product is going to work. And I think that depends on your industry, but if somebody's got a lot of capital in your industry, you're probably going to be in trouble. So I guess it kind of comes down to this, this fortitude to go and say, hey, we're going to have to make a bigger bet than we're used to with software, because this is like drug trials, and it's more expensive to run drug trials than it does to build software. But the results are going to be more dramatic in terms of how it moves the needle on your business. So it's sort of bigger investments with bigger outcomes. And until we start seeing some of those big outcomes happening in certain industries, those breakout leaders, which we still haven't yet, because either some of them are in the middle of building that bridge and, we're not going to notice until they complete it that, holy crap, this can take 10 times the traffic the old bridge took. So they're kind of quietly building that bridge. Until those breakouts come, the pressure's not going to be there,
right?
To do it. And in the meantime, what do you do to kind of flip into this new world of, hey, this isn't normal software? How does it affect the sort of funding of these things? I don't know. What are your thoughts around what you're seeing? When we last talked, funding was more dabbling in POCs. Where is that now?
Yeah, well, you said it. It's high risk, high reward to be an early mover.
Right.
Until this is more proven, becomes more of a universal trend, it's going to be hard to make the case. Now, some organizations are being more forced into it than others, right? Where generative AI is an existential threat to their business model. Think about businesses that create content,
right,
for revenue. It's for profit, and so they're a little bit ahead of everyone else because they had to address it at the heart of their business, and now they're addressing it.
It's funny that may end up becoming their superpower. Like, it may be bad now, but it may just be the kick in the pants that gets them ahead of everybody.
But it's going to rationalize those market segments, right? It's winners and losers, right?
Yep.
You're now in a race to thrive in the new world. In other industries will come behind that, but so to answer your question, it goes back to what I said earlier. We are actually finally seeing a spike in demand of large enterprise clients that are looking to start this journey. When I say this journey, I'm talking about the AI as the UI journey, right? As being one of the two big transformational opportunities we talked about.
AI, yeah, that's interesting. That's super good to hear that it's considered an AI journey versus an AI
it's an
UI
AI experience.
UI journey versus a back-end journey or a point solution journey. Yeah.
Yeah. But the trend there is they tend to be organizations with really large workforces. So when I'm talking large, I mean 100K plus.
Got it.
There's only so many of those on the planet, right?
Right.
But if you think about that high risk, high reward,
incremental moves have high rewards.
Exactly. The high risk, the equation on the reward side is a little bit easier to hit the mark, right?
Yeah, catch up can be a high ROI when you look at the number of meals being served across 100,000.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
Unless you don't like ketchup.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great. Greg, we should catch up again,
Yes.
I guess, in another year.
We should.
And see where we've come, because a lot has changed, and it's been great catching up with you.
Yeah.
It feels like we always have something interesting to talk about. So I'm
We do.
happy to come back anytime.
Awesome.
All right.
All right. Good to see you guys.
Thanks. See ya.
All right. Well, thanks again for joining this ongoing conversation about conversational AI. Be sure to subscribe to Invisible Machines wherever you get your podcasts, and if you feel so inclined, please leave us a review on the Apple Podcast app. You can also watch these conversations on the Invisible Machines YouTube channel. This podcast is produced for UX Magazine in partnership with OneReach.ai. Over the past 5 years, our team of nearly 200 engineers, scientists, experienced designers, anthropologists, and linguists have been developing Generative Studio X, an award-winning platform that has the lone distinction of being named a leader by every major analyst group. GSX is a complete environment for hosting, creating, analyzing, and scaling your own digital teammates called Intelligent Digital Workers. For an interactive demo of IDWs in action and to learn more about the GSX platform, head to OneReach.ai. This podcast would not be possible without the hard work and dedication of executive producer Elias Parker and producer Kate Timchenko. Our video and audio editor is Michael Litvinov, and we rely on support from the marketing team at OneReach.ai, including Allison Harshberger, Anastasia Nechtalio, and Vera Prokodko. Thanks again, and we look forward to connecting with you next week, right here on Invisible Machines.